Well, thank you so much for convening this distinguished panel, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll get right to the questioning and briefly ask Mr. Maybe it's not an appropriate question for Mr. Hairston. Maybe it's more appropriate question for Ms. Kitchett or Mr. Stalkup. But I want to refer to Mr. Hairston's testimony. You mentioned that the workforce at the SBA lost 631 people due to losses in your temporary workforce hired to service disaster loans from Hurricane Katrina. Is that a typical entry point into the federal government to hire minorities for as a temporary workforce? I can imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hairston, that there were lots of needs for translation and other services that only perhaps Hispanics or others could provide, and you hire that temporary workforce. Is there any formal sort of effort to harvest those temporary work experiences to put them in the queue for upward mobility?
I would certainly say that when we ramp up for disaster activity, and particularly the magnitude of Hurricane Katrina, we are reaching out and hiring as many people from all walks of life as we can possibly do as fast as we can. We also do keep in mind the fact that the diversity of the population that we have to serve during those disaster times, and when we do have the opportunity to find individuals who are bilingual or are representative of the communities that are affected, we certainly take advantage of that. To say that that is a good entry point, you would have to say that it is a good entry point, because while they're making disaster loans, they are also having the opportunity to become familiar with SBA programs and SBA.
I don't want to be rude, but I want to ask the OMB and GAO. Is there some articulation between, first of all, how widespread is this temporary hiring among federal agencies, not just the SBA? And is that or contract work, and is there some formal effort to articulate that into full-time positions?
I'll take a crack at that. There are lots of temporary jobs filled every year, but they are temporary. In fact, more jobs are filled on a temporary basis than on a permanent basis during the year. It depends on how the temporary jobs are filled, but generally they're non-competitive. So they include our summer hires and our seasonal workers and things like that.
Okay, are there different qualifications for, other than taking the test, other than getting these same folk that are hired for temporary workers, would they in fact qualify for a regular federal job?
They would need to compete for that job. However, their experience as a temporary worker would be very valuable in helping them compete.
Are there any
favorably.
formalized programs to say, hey, you've been a temporary worker, we have this fast growing, we have this executive order, and with all due respect, this is a civil rights issue, to have the fastest growing population in the United States be woefully underrepresented in the delivery of federal government services. So is there any, so Mr. Chairman, all I'm doing with this line of questioning, because I'm going to run out of time, is just suggest that in addition to the amazing work that Mr. Gill's organization has done, that the Hispanic Federal Executives Association is doing, that this might be a more straightforward sort of way of doing it. I guess I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Osegueda regarding his assertion that without a robust presence in the feeder pipelines and strong measures of accountability, future Hispanic representation at the senior level of government will only get worse. You have talked a little bit about how there's no accountability for meeting the executive orders, and I guess I'd like you to expand on that in the remaining time.
Yes. I didn't mention this, but it's included in my notes that the EEOC has failed to enforce the uniform guidelines on employee selection procedures to monitor agency selection practices. OMB and OPM have rubber-stamped agencies' progress in implementing the diversity component of the President Management Agenda for the strategic management of human capital. And we believe that OPM has failed to effectively monitor and enforce the principles of the Executive Order 13171. So that's what we are talking about, accountability. And what we think is that no agency is actually enforcing these diversity practices. So agencies are independently and doing what they are doing. And that's the reason why the hiring of Hispanics is, for the past 40 years, has been 0.13%.
Okay, so no one is enforcing what they're doing. They're just doing their own thing.
That's what our observation is. So that's the reason we support this type of legislation, but we think that this is going to bring into the process that measure of accountability that we think we are missing.